Hi, Ted. Dave Kelly here. How are you?
Yes. Nice to meet you. Fine.
Nice to
I'm
meet
fine.
you. Wonderful conversation the other day. Before Dennis gets on, I thought your discussion on dialogue works with NEMA, and I've seen a lot of your discussions. I thought it was one of the best.
Oh, really? That's
It
interesting.
just,
That's good to know.
having taken physics in college, I appreciate when something is explained clearly.
Yeah.
And it's funny, I think the American Physical Society obviously backed up your findings over these years, especially on the Scud.
Yeah.
Why are people now objecting to the same logic and the same type of analysis in a real world situation? I do not understand that.
I wouldn't say they're objecting to it. I think they're ignoring it. There's
They're
just
what?
like no response.
Yeah.
There's no response.
Well, this is like when Dennis fought the Iraq War. They would basically make ad hominem attacks,
Yeah.
but they would not deal with him.
Right. Well, more recently, this recent stuff that I'm talking about is just ignored. Nobody, nobody's picking up on it at all.
Did you notice that the Senate Armed Services Committee in June passed a resolution that the GAO no longer looks at the efficacy of these intercept programs and others? They've just done away with any accountability. They just pay the money.
Well, there is no accountability. I mean, it's a simple, almost overly simple description of the situation is in the Gulf War of 1991, where my colleague George Lewis and I first started raising questions. It turned out that the government, both the contractor and the Army Air Defense Artillery, had no data to support any of their claims of performance. We were the ones who had data. The questions that they were trying to claim that the data we had, that the video data was irrelevant, didn't tell you anything. But when you realize that the video data does tell you everything you need to know, then the only group that had any data was us, because they didn't collect data. They didn't have data recorders on their machines during the gate. I was stunned when I first learned about it. So when the Congress went down to Huntsville, Alabama, and asked for the evidence of high intercept rates, they had none.
96%, they said.
Yeah. And we have the same situation now. I'm talking to people inside different governments now, European as well as military people in both European and the American military, and they're being told they have documents.
Great. Okay, let me just start this off. I'd like to thank both of you, Professor Ted Postol of MIT, Dennis Kucinich. I just want to start off in saying I'm excited to have two of America's finest equestrians here. And the joke was, I say equestrians because there's this proverb that those who tell the truth should first have one foot in the stirrup. Obviously, you guys have both had one foot in the stirrup.
Yes.
You, especially starting with your analysis of failed intercept rates and, Patriot missile and Iron Dome and other things over the years, which have proven to be absolutely positively correct. And Dennis had one foot in the stirrup in organizing Congress to try to fight against the Iraq War. So I wanted to start off and then let me get out of the way, because you're the two truth tellers. You're the people who pointed out the lies and the misperceptions and the clever ways that the American people have been sold frauds at times. Especially, and I'd like to start off with Ted talking, just to give a brief summary of what you learned about the Patriot II in the first 1991 Gulf War, where the intercept rate was first touted at something like 96%, and what is happening now, and how the American public is being sold on a system that will not protect us, and the Israeli people will not be protected. There's a whole fraud being perpetuated, and I would like everyone to go see Dialogue Works with Professor Postol in NEMA, where he did an analysis last week that was spectacular, a 1 hour analysis with slides and everything else. let me get out of the way and start with you, Professor Postol. Would you start with telling us the questions you have raised about the Patriot missile in the past and now?
Well, when I first heard that the Patriot was a tremendous success, strangely enough, I was surprised because I had done some writing and analysis on these kinds of missile defenses, actually for quite a few years before we actually saw a lot of data being, actual combat. And I had assessed that the systems would be would work very poorly. But of course, I had no data at that point. And when I first heard that it was so successful, I said, gee whiz, I was wrong. That was my first reaction. I guess this thing, I got fooled. I pride myself in being forthright about whether or not I'm right or wrong. And so I was, preparing to eat crow publicly. And through a series of accidents, I started seeing videos of the Patriot Scud engagements, because on television they were showing these videos. And I remember the first video I saw was a description of the success of a Patriot of the Patriot interceptor. And when I looked at the video, I could see that there were two interceptors fired, and both clearly missed the target, and it went onto the ground. So it was obvious to me that in that particular situation, it clearly failed, twice. And because of that, I talked to my colleague, George Lewis, who worked very closely with me on this particular analysis, and we started looking for videos of Patriot Scud engagements that were on the press, were on television. And we found a bunch of them, and all of them were failures. And so I was asked to testify before Congress about this. And at that time, some people in Congress were interested in real expertise being testimony. So I went to this congressional hearing, and I explained why it was not clear that Patriot's performance was as good as people were claiming. And after I remember, as I came off the plane from Washington, there's all these press there. I was completely stunned by this. I totally surprised by it. And there were all these people with cameras and things. And, this was, a first cut estimate of what might or might not have occurred. I wasn't sure it was a total failure at that point. I just knew it was not it was certainly not a 96% rate. That was clear. And then I started getting these negative messages from people in the MIT administration. And quite frankly, it made me angry. I got an envelope from the president's office with 3 letters from wealthy MIT alumni criticizing what I had done, what I had said. No content at all, none at all. It was just a bunch of guys sitting on their yachts, and it was overtly content free. And so I was not too happy with getting these, just letters in an envelope. Not even the envelope wasn't even sealed. And so I arranged to see the president. It was our president, Charles Vest at the time, a real crook. And I say this, I mean this. I mean, this guy is a real crook. I mean, he was involved in lying to the Senate Armed Services Committee later on about a weapon system that was failing. And this was the kind of person we had as president of MIT at the time. All right. And we followed him with two other crooks. The person we now have who's a president is a pretty high caliber person. The three characters over the time that I was on the faculty, these was literally crooks. I mean, if the government were working properly, you could bring criminal charges against them for lying to the Congress. And in any case, that's another story. The integrity of our universities, which is not high. But I went and visited. Anyways, he was a very informal guy, Chuck. He likes to, and very smooth, total liar, but very smooth. And he hugs me when I come into the office, and it was really buddy. And I asked him, why did you, what message were you trying to send to me by putting these three uninformed letters into an unsealed envelope and sending it to me? What were you trying to tell me? Oh, I'm trying to keep you informed about the university, blah, blah. I said, well, I have no desire at all to be a university administrator. But I can tell you, if I had been in your position and I had these letters and I felt that it would be a good idea for you to see them, I would have put them in an envelope and I would have added a note. And the note would have said, we're following your work. We think it's good service for the country, which is what we are. What we at a great engineering unit. Remember, we're an engineering university, and we have an obligation to keep the public and the country well informed, about what can and cannot work as technology. And I applaud you. And here are these letters. They're critical, but you should understand I stand behind you. That's what I would have done. So he looked at me like, oh, we're just friends. He had this approach of he's a friend of everybody. Very, very good lobbyist for MIT. People liked him for that reason. I never liked him because he was a liar, and that doesn't appeal to me. And so I basically said, well, Chuck, since we're all so informal, never do that again, because if you do, I'm going to make it a public issue. And, and people are watching right now. And that's the kind of thing that you don't want to have discussed in public as an MIT president. Just don't do it ever again. And I left the office. So, of course, he was involved in other attempts to undermine my work. And I had lots of when you get a grant from a private organization, all of my grants were from private foundations, because government doesn't fund you to rain on their parade. You don't get government contracts. And so when you get a grant, let's say you get $1 million grant, the grant doesn't go to you. The foundation gives it to you for in support, but the university is the one that has the money. So they can mismanage your accounts, for example, which they did, and cost you money. Because if they mismanage your account and you lose funds because they mismanage the account, then you don't have funds to pay the people in your group, to buy equipment, things like that. And so I was constantly under this mismanagement of accounts, things like that. Of course, every time you caught something, it wasn't like the simple thing to do if it were legitimate is you say, well, we made this mistake with your account. We got billions of dollars of our own. The MIT is not an underfunded university. We're going to correct this. we're going to put this money back into your account. Wouldn't do it. So, so that, they undermine you in all kinds of ways, and but unfortunately for them, I was a full professor and tenured. Although I would like to say that my dean, the last dean I had, Deborah Fitzgerald was her name, for those of you who, she went out of her way to, I'd say, brag to me that I was the lowest paid full professor on the faculty. She went out of her way to tell me that. And, and of course, I can't say I cared about it. One of my shortfalls as an individual is I have a lot of trouble dealing with money. But fortunately, I have a wife who's an extremely capable business person. And so I'm really helpless. I mean, people don't believe this, but it's true. I'm really helpless when it comes to money. I just, so was Mozart. So I don't, but not to compare myself, but it's a problem from my childhood. It literally, but Kathy takes care of everything. She, and we were, we are, quite well off because of her fastidiousness and, management skills and her own professional activities. So, and my wife just told me, she said, look, you are doing what's right, and I support it. And, I make enough money that, you're not making nothing. You're still an MIT professor. And you may be making half or third the salary of your colleagues. But it's still a reasonable salary, and I'm making a boatload, and we both are in this for the country. We both feel that this is a service to the country. And so I was never, even though I got letters that my wife is an expert on unemployment. She actually was a very high level person at Fidelity Investments. So she would regularly deal with Ned Johnson, who owned the company. It was a privately held company. And so she was a very high level executive. And, she'd look at the letter. She said, this is the kind of letter you send to somebody when you're basically telling them you're about to fire them. So now, of course, they could have tried, but I had a 10-year contract. And that would be a big problem because these contracts are pretty solid from a legal point. If they catch you doing something like molesting a student or something, which actually doesn't necessarily get you thrown off the faculty in some cases, which is pretty amazing. But unless they catch you on something that's truly unlawful, it's hard for them to put together a case to fire you. Although they tried to accuse me of harassing people, things like that, but they had no evidence, so that was a problem for them. But it was not a pleasant situation being at MIT, and it was all due to the administrators, the 3 different presidents we had under which I was a faculty member. None of these people were innocent. All of them knew exactly what they were doing. I have letters that show they knew what they were doing. And they just couldn't dislodge me, no matter how uncomfortable they made it for me and the members of my group. These people who are innocent, who worked in my research group, their salaries were paid by these research grants. So when MIT screwed around with our research grants, this, at some point, these people, their careers could have been threatened. It turned out that it didn't happen, but I was very worried. I was worried all the time about my research staff. So it was a very unpleasant situation with regard to the university. And since that time, I've seen a couple of other universities up close, in particular Harvard and Stanford. And I'm afraid the leadership in those universities is not at least the leadership I saw, is not of a much higher caliber. And from this limited situation, I've just reluctantly come to the conclusion that these universities are just giant corporations that are treated, they're tax-free, or they're treated as special because they're educational institutions, but their commitment to doing to independent scholarship is very weak, unless the independent scholarship has nothing to do with their budget. In other words, if you're talking about a theological argument and you're a controversial scholar in theology, and they'll stand up there and defend your right to be independent. But if you say anything that threatens a dollar from their budget, even though it's a dollar that they're stealing because they're not being truthful about it, then they're going to come after you. They're going to try to find a way to pressure you.
That brings up, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
That brings us to, I'd like to go to some basics with you in a minute, but first I'd like Dennis to come in and talk about his experience. But I'd like you to tell people that will listen to this, tell them why intercepting a missile is so hard, and why does the continuing changes in arms, why it remains so implacably difficult. And as Andrei Sakharov, the great Russian physicist, who I think you're very much like, because he argued about the danger of these weapons.
Yes, yes.
He actually had a conscience. Okay.
Yes, and he had quite a serious conscience.
I've always thought you were a Sakharov of the society.
Yeah, well,
I
wish I were of that stature, but
pardon me?
You're giving me a little too much credit.
No, I don't think I'm exaggerating your stature. I'm not into hyperbole. But I'd like Dennis just to come in, and then I'd like you to deal with the difficulties of doing what they say they're doing.
Audience why. Yeah.
And then I'd like to first have Dennis talk about, in October of 2002, Dennis, you did an 8-page talk on the floor of the House telling about all the lies that were being told to justify the Iraq War. Would you go into that and the response that you received at that time?
Well, there's a couple of things here. One is to discuss the Iraq War, and the other one is to get into this two discussions beyond that. One deals with the idea of interceptor missiles, specifically before Congress, and the other one deals with it as a shield against any offensive effort. So when it came to the Iraq War, it was abundantly clear to me right from the beginning, when the Bush administration began to promote it immediately after 9/11, that the case that they were making lacked credibility, because Iraq didn't have anything to do with 9/11. Did not have the intention to or capability to attack the United States. And, and they weren't working with Al Qaeda. There were some, very serious and fundamental differences that existed between the government of Iraq and Al Qaeda. And they didn't have weapons of mass destruction. In the first Iraq-Iran war, the United States was supplying various chemical weapons to Iraq. So we had the manifests, okay. But the weapons inspectors who had been there following that period, people like Scott Ritter, were able to establish that whatever capability Iraq may have had at one time, they didn't have anymore. So after doing this research, I saw the drumbeat before Congress to try to pass what it was called the Authorization for the Use of Military Force. Remember the time frame here. We've got September 11th, 2001. And then on the second anniversary of 9/11, where emotions are still running very high across the country about that horrible day, who appears before a government, affairs and oversight committee to encourage the attack on Iraq, but one Mr. and former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And I questioned him at that committee hearing about that. At the same time, I was working on developing information to send to members of Congress because we had a vote coming up. And that vote was in October of 2002 to give the Bush administration permission. They hadn't made a case. It was all conjecture, innuendo, and very false statements made by the president and by the vice president and by the then Secretary of State. So there was this push to go after Iraq, which began right after 9/11, even though Iraq wasn't connected to it. So I led the effort against that, and I took many occasions on the floor of Congress to point out that there was no intention that Iraq had to attack the United States and that this was basically fraudulent. Nevertheless, the authorization for the use of military force passed, and we know what happened as a result. Perhaps $3 to $5 trillion of money spent, over even worse, 1 million innocent Iraqis perished in a war that should have never happened. Now, during the buildup to this kind of aggression, the United States was preparing an argument about how we were basically going to be immune from any counter strikes because we had weapon systems that had been developed to such a degree that we would be essentially invulnerable. And one of those tests came before, one of those moments of a presentation came before the Government Oversight Committee. And a general, I think his name was Kucinich, was making this presentation, a video presentation. They dimmed the lights in the room. They put up a screen. You saw this missile launched ostensibly towards the United States, and then all of a sudden, the interceptor shoots up into the sky, and incredibly, this bullet meets a bullet high above the earth, and boom, it disintegrates. I mean, it was very impressive, and many members of the committee were suitably awed at this display of extraordinary technical excellence. It came to me to ask a question, and my question was very simple. General, were the original missile and the defensive missile, were they programmed to hit each other? Long pause, shifting in his seat. General? Yes, they were. We're just demonstrating this. Look, there was fraud right from the beginning as to whether or not this kind of, the interceptor missiles would work. I went to the floor of the House because there was a drumbeat for this, and one of the leaders of this effort, Armed Forces, who's actually a very good friend of mine today. But I went there, and as this debate was going, I had prepared to get into the debate, and I took an umbrella and I cut out the panels of the umbrella. Open it up on the floor of the House. And all of a sudden, there's no protection against the rain, right? And there's no protection against any missiles with this shield. So, yeah, I mean, but it was people but specifically Dr. Ted Postol, whose work provided an imprimatur, intellectual and scientific background and authority to raise the questions about that needed to be raised about the technical statements that were made about the effectiveness of these missiles. There's a range of objections that go from the efficacy of such a program as opposed to diplomacy, how much it's going to cost in terms of what conceivable possible benefit you could have if you were able to prove it worked. But if you couldn't prove that it worked, what are we talking about? We're talking about fraud. We're talking about stealing from the taxpayers. And enter Dr. Ted Postol, who proved that this missile system that we're talking about, like many of its attempted counterparts, that the effectiveness of it was at best highly questionable and at worst chimerical. So
it's interesting, Dennis, that you had a discussion with Ronald Kadish, General Ronald Kadish. I at about that time got a lot of attention when I showed that that one of the critical, probably the most critical experiment for that missile defense failed catastrophically, and that if that experiment failed, then it meant that the system could never work. And what the experiment was they flew a suite of targets. One of them was a real mock warhead, and a whole bunch of other targets were things that could look like a mock warhead to a distant interceptor that's looking at these things with infrared sensors. And the objects were very well defined. A very good friend of mine, God bless him, Phil Coyle.
I know.
I'm sorry?
I met him. I knew him.
Yeah, Phil is was a wonderful man. And I was in the Pentagon and I was visiting him in his shop. I remember it was funny as all hell because he had me go into a back room and hide because some people from the Missile Defense Agency were coming in. He didn't want them to know I was visiting him. But he gave me some internal, they were not, classified. They were things that they were advertising with, which later ran on the front page of the New York Times, front page. And that showed all the different decoys. And they couldn't tell any of the decoys from the warhead. MIT was involved in covering up the failure of that experiment, which is what got me going at MIT. In other words, not only did I have a problem with Patriot years earlier, I had a problem with MIT with them covering up a serious failure that indicated that this defense system, which is different from Patriot, that this defense system could never work in combat. Or, in other words, this was not a debatable point. If you were a technical person looking at this, you'd say, my goodness, a 2-foot diameter balloon is going to be a credible decoy to this system. How, an adversary can put a warhead out there with hundreds of these balloons or even thousands of them. They weigh a few ounces. So it was clear this system had no chance of ever working, and MIT covered it up. This is when I was talking about lying to the Senate Armed Services Committee, which my good friend Chuck Vest, the president of MIT, was involved in. A criminal. This is criminal activity. You can talk about it. This is not a difference of opinion. This is like me knowing that a bridge is going to collapse if people use it. and telling the public, don't worry, go ahead and use it. I know this bridge is going to collapse. So this is a moral failure on a tremendous scale. Anyway, to get back to my other friend, Ronald Kucinich, of all things, the administration was so out of touch with what it was doing. I'm forgetting who was the Secretary of Defense at the time. It was he would go around as a poet. He would always talk about what anyway. The Secretary of Defense actually agreed with 60 Minutes to allow them to film one of the experiments while it was occurring. This was later on, while it was occurring, in the control room. Now, I'll be honest with you. If I were working on a system like this and I thought it would work, in other words, if I had a system I thought would work, I would not want a film crew in my test center when I'm testing the system, because everybody's got their, because you're trying to make this complicated thing work. It may or may not work, even if it should be able to be made to work. You just don't want all the tension there, and it's easy to misinterpret. So I would have preferred not to have this kind of. But anyway, Kucinich must have been overridden by the secretary. So they're there, and they launch, and these experiments take tens of minutes, because it takes tens of minutes for interceptors to fly a certain distance. And, this is very long-range strategic interceptors. So they launch the interceptor, and then they launch the target. Well, the target was supposed to be was supposed to be a mock warhead and a small balloon and a large balloon, both of which they misrepresented as decoys. Now, the reason they misrepresented them as decoys is because they already knew that if they saw these two objects without knowledge of what they were, that they wouldn't be able to tell whether or not they were the warhead. But they knew in advance that the small balloon would be the dimmest object, and that the large balloon would be the brightest object, and the warhead would be in between. Well, what happened is the canister that was supposed to deploy the large balloon didn't open. So that meant that the canister could look like the warhead, because it was a significant canister, and it wouldn't have, it was all pre-programmed, as Dennis had understood. In this case, it was pre-programmed to falsely indicate that they can tell decoys from warheads. So Kucinich is there, and he's sitting there, and he looks very unhappy. The 60 Minute journalist asks him, General, why do you look unhappy about this? What's going on? And he says, well, the canister didn't open, and now the system won't be able to tell the warhead from the decoy. He says this on national television. And I advertised that as everywhere I could. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. I mean, this is the kind of congressional oversight we had then. Now it's even worse, of course. But I mean, the guy who's running the program tells you this thing can't tell the difference between a canister and a balloon and a warhead, and he admits it on national television. So we have a problem. It's not only a problem with making sound decisions about technology, but it's also a problem. I would hope there would have been a congressional hearing on this. Nope.
Dr. Postol brings up something that when you really get into it, you can see how the so-called Department of Defense, Department of War now they like to call it, has become a cesspool of corruption on procurement of various types of defense systems, whether they're space-based, air, land, sea. You can go chapter and verse across the entire range of procurement to find it riddled with fraud and abuse, cost overruns, and with end products that just simply don't work. Whether it's missile defense, helicopters that fall out of the sky, advanced planes that to keep up with the technology, they figure out will cost hundreds of billions of dollars to put into production. And so what is this all about? This is the Department of Defense, as Eisenhower warned about in his valedictory, is a marching band and chowder society for a wide range of interests who just want to assert that they will do something for the defense of the United States of America, when all they want to do is get approval for it and then see if it can work, but they don't really care. And sometimes you see things like the Osprey helicopter, and you see Marines plummeting to the ground in these machines that over and over again proved to be of questionable technical efficacy. And so, the bigger question here, as we are in the advent of approval of a $1.5 trillion annual Department of Defense -war authorization, the fraud that is implicate here, the fraud that numerous inspectors general have been able to fully document to members of Congress, the fraud that has cost the taxpayers easily trillions, continues because it's embedded in a system that is just about trying to make things and averring that they work, whether they do or not. And once you get it into the system, once you can get into your foot in the door in a procurement system, my God, I mean, this is like you're going to live forever because these things have a headlong momentum that never stop. Now, just for the moment, just think if a fraction of that was actually spent on diplomacy, on a different approach that wasn't about precipitating wars and then pretending you have the ability to defend against the war that you started. We'd have a different world today. But this is one of the fundamental flaws in American governance. And with it is this archipelago of 800 plus bases and this American imperium. It's all part of the same thing. And ultimately, it does represent a massive fraud upon the taxpayers and all the people in the United States, because we're led to believe that it's a high technology which will defend us instead of the higher cognitive functions of the human mind. So there you have it. Welcome to Washington.
Can I ask a question that's really important? President Trump will be speaking to the nation tomorrow night, and I and a lot of other people are terrified that this war with Iran is going to go into, it'll bring them back to a Stone Age society. And I'd like Dr. Postol and you to talk about that. First of all, Israel will not escape unscathed from this, nor the Gulf nations, nor when you have nearly 100 million people who have been decimated, there'll be blowback. over a period of time against the United States. So I'd like you to talk about what you think he's going to say and the dangers. And this is where Professor Postol has been especially astute lately in pointing out all of the missiles that we're hitting, like in Tel Aviv, as you pointed out in the Dialogue Works episode.
Well, first of all, I have no idea what Trump will say at any moment, so I can't speculate on that. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But I do think that the survival of Israel over the long term is at risk. I think the Iranians have the ability to continue doing severe damage to Israel with their long-range ballistic missiles and their long-range drones. They have the ability to continue producing them because they have all of this underground structure. They have a producing economy, military production economy that's underground in tunnels. We don't know how to find those tunnels. We don't, you can attack the tunnel entrance, but so what? They clear it. You can't be there all the time. You can't have an aircraft just loitering there. They'll eventually shoot the airplane down. We were seeing that now. Doesn't take much to eventually shoot the plane down. So you can't just be loitering around the tunnel. They can choose a time to go out and launch more from that tunnel. They can hide tunnel entrances by putting sand over the tunnel and going through the top of the tunnel. So we're not going to be able to stop them from being able to attack Israel pretty much like they were doing in the early part of the war. That's going to continue if the war turns against Israel, not just the Persian Gulf military installations that the United States has. So I think that should be a real concern for people who are concerned about the future of Israel. Now, I have to say, I have many friends in Israel, and I've even worked with people in the Israeli government on helping them work with the Pentagon on occasion, and I no longer am willing to do that. I am totally offended by what I see going on in Israel. I think it's more than Netanyahu. I think Netanyahu's taking advantage of the situation, and but when you look at interviews of Israelis on the street, and there are now available, people are doing it. This state has descended into a fascist environment. I mean, people just comfortably talk about murdering, non-combatants, and just eliminating them. This is Nazi Germany. I mean, you can't talk about Nazi Germany and not talk about Israel when you see what's going on there. It's the same thing. It's horrifying to me. My friends in Israel are horrified by this too. I mean, I wouldn't deal with anybody who I wouldn't have anything to do with it. But there are people who are genuinely moral and ethical there, but they're a minority and they can't do anything about it. So I think if this war starts up again, which seems inevitable it will, and it eventually gets to Iran attacking Israel again, it's going to do tremendous damage to Israel. I don't know how their economy is already falling apart, and it's a real question whether this country can survive in the long term, at least in my mind. In addition, the average American, and I include myself in that category, is so offended by this country and its behavior that they don't want a nickel spent to support them, let alone the roughly nearly $4 billion a year we give them for military enterprise. And I think that's going to have an effect over time. We even see in the Congress Just, I think it was just today, there was a vote to not support the war effort. It was not overly convincing, but it was still enough members of the Senate to stop debate on this matter. So I think this getting back into this war is going to be terrible for Israel, and it's going to be terrible for the rest of the world and the United States, because the global economy is suffering tremendously due to this, the Strait of Hormuz being closed. I think there are adjustments going on in the oil supply because certain countries are now producing more oil in response to the loss of Middle Eastern oil, but that's not enough to offset things. If it escalates and the Americans do damage to Iran's oil production facilities, the Iranians have said, and there's no doubt they will and can, destroy oil producing capabilities in the other Gulf states, which will be a very long-lived problem. And the economy, the global economy, is unpredictably going to go down in a serious way. I have no idea how badly it could go down, but it could go down to levels well below what occurred in the Great Depression. You can't rule that out. And the United States is not going to escape from that, especially since we have all these bonds that we float to support our debt. So I don't think the continuation of this war is very good, for anybody. But it's also not good for Trump, because he's going to get into a worse position with the American public as well, and rightfully so.
If I may enter into to this specific discussion with a few observations. Everything about the war against Iran has been, all of the assumptions behind it have been wrong. And we must remember that Trump was essentially dragged into this by Netanyahu and American-related interests who support the ultra-Zionist land acquisition that Netanyahu's government is involved in. So right from the beginning, this idea was that somehow it was in the interest of the United States to topple the Ayatollah, and because there was so much opposition, the American people were told that the government would just fall, and a new group would arise that would work with the United States, and we'd be live happily ever after. Well, on February 28th, they did kill Ayatollah Khamenei. They killed members of his family. They also killed 168 people at Manab, most of them little girls and their teachers. And the blowback has been extraordinary, because what they did, rather than to deeply fracture the Iranian people along the partisan lines that exist there, they caused an amazing consolidation of support for the government, and a backlash, a powerful emotional backlash against the killing of those children and their teachers at Manab. Up to this point, the U.S., from all sources and knock-on expenses, is into this for about $1 trillion right now. This war hasn't. The marketing of the non-war says that, well, there was a period of kind of a truce where they're discussing a way to exit the war, a memorandum of understanding, blah, blah, blah. There's a lower level, less public intensity of exchanges that were going on that have become even hotter in the last week. And the U.S. Has had a huge presence in the Gulf. That presence is being eliminated by the counterstrikes of Iran in responding to the U.S. and Israel's strikes on Iranian territory and Iranian assets. Recently, one of the attacks against Iran came perilously close to reaching the Bushehr nuclear facility. And, we have over 100 nuclear power plants in the United States, any one of which, if it was hit by a bomb, would create catastrophic consequences within easily 100 or 200 miles of the site. And there's not only Bushehr, there's Fordo and others that are potential targets. I warned when I was in Congress. I gave over 100 speeches about why over a period of years about why we should prefer diplomatic initiatives with Iran as opposed to attacking them. And during the Bush administration, there was an active discussion about dropping nuclear weapons on Iran, and I pointed out that the fallout would have consequences for many nations, not just Iran, and that you can end up killing tens of millions of people. Everything about this is wrong, and it's being done not because it's in the U.S. interest, but because it's in the supposed interests of the Israeli government and of Benjamin Netanyahu trying to stay out of jail. No one knows what Trump's going to say, and he doesn't even know what he's going to say until he says it often. If there's an escalation of this, we already know that the first series of strikes caused a dramatic increase in the price of gas. This is one way that Americans can register their feelings about a war that they didn't ask for, that they don't approve of. But over a period of time, we've seen the price of gas rise sharply by mid-May. And I think that we're probably looking, if there is a new round of strikes and counterstrikes, and that it cripples the production of oil in the Gulf, which is already happening, that it results in the complete closure of the Strait of Hormuz and probably the closure of Bab el-Mandab. We're looking at gasoline going up past $5, maybe $6 as America enters the home stretch of the midterms. Now, the political consequences are one thing. I think about the moral and ethical consequences of bombing people who we really don't have any quarrel with, and bombing anybody. I mean, I'm opposed to war because I see it as a con job right from the beginning. And this whole idea about we've mixed up the concept of defense and offense deliberately. So, when there was an attempt to come up with some semblance, however fake some aspects of it were, of an agreement in this memorandum of understanding, Netanyahu intervened immediately because he did not want to stop the attack on South Lebanon, because his whole idea about living space for more settlers would have flopped. So he wasn't going to give that up. And so this, again, everything about this is wrong, and nothing good can come of it. Only more tragedy and horror for innocent people. And Trump is going to carry his Republican Party to an ignominious defeat in the House elections and maybe the Senate elections, based on the fact that he promised the American people that we would not be in this situation, that we would not have these forever wars. And it's exactly what he has. And one final word here. one of the battles that's going on right now in Congress is whether or not there should, in fact, be a merger of Israeli and U.S. military assets. Section 219 of the National Defense Authorization Act of 2027 would, at the highest levels of function, the greatest technological or asserted technological expression, Israel and the United States will integrate, eliminate duplication, and essentially merge the defense interests. So Israel no longer will have to worry about tin cupping for $4 billion. They'll have access to the complete $1.5 trillion. There's questions of national sovereignty, of the U.S. Constitution, and on treaties, and all kinds of other things that are wrong with this. But as usually happens in the United States Congress and the U.S. government, what's a constitution among friends, right? So this debate's going on right now in the House and the Senate as to the approval of the NDAA, although there's never been any committee hearings on this merger that I've just talked about. So look, there's nothing, we're in a very dangerous situation as a nation and as a world. And I'm glad that Ted Postol's around to raise the questions, central questions about, do these, with all the drum beating and chest thumping that goes on in the government, you're trying to sell things to the American people that do not work, that do not defend us. And we better start thinking about the science of human relations as our ultimate defense, not the procurement waltzes inside the Pentagon. So I'm going to have to drop off this call right now, and I apologize for doing that, but I would urge you to, Dave Kelly and Dr. Postol to,
Just one last question I'd like to ask Dr. Postol, and that is, Dr. Postol, we've seen the tragedy of, like, Mila Cohen, 10 months old, shot through a safe room door in Kibbutz Be'eri. We've seen Hind Rajab. We've seen hundreds of thousands perhaps die. But I'd like now to turn back to the United States. And our real defense budget, if you follow Chalmers Johnson, and the VA, for example, will be like $489 billion. The real defense budget, somewhere between 2.3 to 2.7 billion, which comes out to be about $30,000 for family of four. And I think about the short life expectancies, those who will die, the anxiety of American families who are underfed, undereducated, because of this new militarism that Andrew Bacevich wrote about in his book, The New American Militarism. And I'd like your take on, why don't we ever have a peace dividend? What's going on that we are going to spend literally $2.5 trillion each year if this NDAA goes through? And what could be done for our families here that are impoverished, leading lives of anxiety?
Well, it's disturbing to me beyond belief to look at what is going on. I must tell you, I am very troubled by what I'm seeing. I'm at an age now where I occasionally need medical help. As you get older, it happens more. And every time I go in to get medical help, which I get very good help, I'm very lucky, I say to myself, what about these poor people who can't get any help at all? I can't get it out of my mind. I can't go to a doctor's appointment that has to do with me without thinking about all these other people, because I'm just so troubled by what I'm seeing. When someone talks about a $1.5 trillion defense budget, I'm saying, my reaction is, you're going to take another $500 billion out of the civilian support budget. You already have all kinds of people dying from conditions that are treatable. That, I'd be dead probably twice, but easily, I think. And I have friends who have similar situations as you get older, and medicine is pretty advanced if you can if you're lucky enough to be educated, to be able to afford it, and to be involved with the right support system. But what about all these other people who have the same right? It's a human right. And I was just by accident looking at the financial, I don't know, economic situation with regard to several of the European powers because of all the nonsense that's being stated about the collapse of the Russian economy. Russian economy is not collapsing. All you have to do is look at the International Monetary Fund projections for the European powers and for Russia. I mean, it's not collapsing.
James
And,
Galbraith has documented this.
yeah, well, it's fine. But I happened to be looking at it, and one of the statistics I was just going through it. I was looking at the purchasing power parity numbers for these different countries, and the United States is about 93,000 a year. That's pretty good. I mean, it's not a lot of money given inflation these days, but if you're in that category, you're not bad off. But that's not true of half of our population. Half of our population is in a situation where they can't they won't be able to deal with a few $100 incident, unexpected incident that cost them $300 or $400. They just don't have the money. They don't have the money to buy gas so that they can move around, given our society is very dependent on automobiles because it was built to spread out. It's designed to be be spread over large distances. They can't afford the gas and food because of what's happening, both the gas prices and, of course, the gigantic increases in the cost of groceries, which is going to get a lot worse. This is not, something that's just an incidental event. This is going to continue. The trend is established for all kinds of reasons, and we have all these people who have gotten vast sums of money. These, I don't know what you call them, the billionaires, and they're not creating wealth. I mean, if you make $1 billion and you create wealth because you built something that's really producing for the society, okay. I mean, it's it's part of a free economy. But when you have a society where some small percentage is getting more and more money, while the great majority is getting less and less, you don't need to be a genius economist to say what's going on here is a transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich. This is not an economy that's growing. I mean, if these people were creating wealth, then all the ships would be rising with the tide, but they're not. So the United States is a very cruel society, I must say, and I'm more and more shocked and disturbed by it as I look at it. And I don't know why that's the case now. Maybe it's because it's so overt and so obvious to me, or maybe it's I'm getting a little older now and I'm feeling more empathy for other people because of although I hope I've never had a lack of empathy for other people. I try not to, but it's just a shocking thing to see. And when this guy Lindsey Graham dies, I almost always have had the reaction that, oh, I don't agree with the person, but I don't wish that on them. But in his case, I looked at him and I said, good. This guy is a monster. He brags about killing people. He brags about stealing from people. I mean, This is not the kind of person I want to see in a decision-making position, an influential decision-making position in my country. I can deal with people I don't agree with. I have all kinds of friends in the military who their politics is much more conservative than mine. But I have no problem with them because we all agree that there's a constitution. We all agree that we're dedicated to preserving the democracy and bettering the country. Doesn't matter to me whether they're Republican or Democrat or conservative or liberal. We all agree that we want to do what's best for the country, and if we have different ideas of how to do that, I don't have a problem with that at all. But these people who don't care at all about the country, these people who all they want is more money, reduce my taxes even though I have billions or tens of billions of dollars. What are they talking about? You know, because when they say reduce my taxes, they mean take this money from the poorer people because the government needs money to run. So they know exactly what they're doing. And there's something not right here, something profoundly disturbing and sick about the structure of our country. In addition, we have the worst kind of capitalism. This argument that people make capitalism versus communism versus socialism, that's nonsense. What we're talking about is a market system. And the market system can be socialized or not. You can have a market system, for example, like Europe has. That's a market system, but the market system makes sure that there are mechanisms for taking care of people. I mean, I have an adopted daughter in Europe, and so I'm in and out of Germany all the time. I see the social support system for her and her neighbors and her friends. You don't have that in the United States. You know, if a woman is pregnant in Germany, she's going to get a year or more. You talk about that in the United States, everyone says, "Oh no, you can't have a woman take all this time off because the economy will suffer." Well, the German economy is now suffering, but it's not suffering because the women are given time, to take off when they're having a child. It's suffering because the energy that Germany needs to continue as a highly industrialized state is now costing 3 times more than it did before the war in Ukraine began. Once with the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline, there's no longer any cheap gas to fuel the economy of Germany. And now the German real gross domestic product now, the real GDP is 0.8%. It's shrinking. It's deindustrializing. So the Russian economy is 1.1%. So when you read the newspaper and they say the Russian economy is falling apart, but well, look at the Europeans. Their economies are falling apart. And so we have a very bad situation in the world in general, and the political leadership is not in touch. The political leadership is out of touch.
I'd like to mention that, you talk about the political leadership. As you probably know, the Rand Corporation, Carter Price and Elizabeth Edwards, they did a study that showed that $79 trillion of wealth had been transferred up to the top 10% since 1975 through 2023. It's over 80 trillion. If the same asset allocation that existed in 1975 existed today, the average American family in the bottom 90% would have $1 million more of assets.
Yep.
Think about that. They would own their home. They would have a retirement. They'd be able to educate their children. $1 million of assets. And it's all been basically done by as Richard Wolff and Michael Hudson points out with NEMA, through asset appreciation. They basically inflated assets and made free money available to the plutocrats, the oligarchs. But it's interesting because you and I and others have actually benefited a little bit from
Oh,
this
tremendously.
yeah. But I recognize the 90% that have been left behind. I'd like to thank you, and I do consider you Andrei Sakharov. You've received all these awards from groups that talk about your devotion to humanity. And that is so clear and so evident in terms of your compassion and your concern. And I hope you keep fighting the good fight and do these presentations, which are eye-opening,
Yes.
to tell people how difficult it is for two missiles to hit one another unless you superheat the warhead you're trying to shoot at. I think did in one experiment. Unless you
Yes.
do just incredible things to fix those results. And you're pointing out what's happening today in Israel. And I don't want anyone to die. I don't want anyone to die in
Of
Israel.
course.
I don't want anyone to die in Gaza. You don't want people to die. And we have these crazy people that are bringing on this inevitable conflagration. So I'd like to thank you for fighting the good fight and educating all of us.
Well, thank you for giving me all this undeserved praise.
That's not undeserved because others have recognized what I've recognized.
Yes.
And it's very humble of you. And I love when your statement of a true academician, like you like to admit mistakes. Politicians never do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's amazing. Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you
Thank
having
you.
me on.
All right.
Bye-bye.